Hi, I'm Mark Powers. Welcome to This Old House. What's your idea of a classic picnic table? Ours is one with X-style legs and separate benches. We spiffed it up by using rough-sawn western red cedar, a low-maintenance wood that gets better with age. It's a project you can easily build in a weekend and still have plenty of time to fire up the grill. The angles on the legs and bracing only look complicated. You use the table as a jig to find them without doing any math. Check out the cut list on this web page for a list of tools and materials. Be sure to call your home center or lumberyard to see if they have the cedar in stock. Let's take it from the top. Cut a 2x8 to length on the miter saw. We made our table 6 feet long for 6 adults. If you need more room, leave the boards 8 feet long, but be sure to dress the ends. Shave a little off to leave a clean cut. Use your first board as a template to mark the others. That way, they'll all be consistent. While you're at the miter saw, go ahead and cut the 2x6s for the benches. Again, use the first board as a template to mark the cuts for the others. Set the bench boards aside for later. To make the tabletop, lay the boards on the work table and use 16 penny nails to space them out. Measure the width of all 5 boards together and subtract 5 inches. Set the miter saw to 45 degrees and cut 3 2x4s to that length with a bevel at each end. Use this cleat as a template to mark the other 2. Back at the work table, arrange each 2x8 so that its best side faces down. Measure and mark the location for the one cleat about 12 inches in from the end of the tabletop. Center the cleat side to side, then mark its edges. Remove the cleat and add a squiggle of construction adhesive to each board within the outline. If you put it on the cleat, it'll ooze into the gaps between the boards. Press the cleat in place, drive deck screws through the cleat and into the tabletop in a zigzag pattern to avoid splitting the cleat. Be sure to get 2 screws in each 2x8. Install the cleat at the other end in the same way. The third cleat forms a jig to find the angle of the legs. Measure 30 inches from one cleat minus the thickness of the tabletop and mark that spot. Make another mark at the other side. Attach the third cleat at these marks with just 2 screws. It's only temporary. Now you have a jig for laying out the legs. Rest a 2x6 blank for a leg diagonally across the cleats of the jig. Line it up so the outside edges overlap the bevels. Mark the underside of the 2x6, remove it, and use a rafter square to connect the marks. Bring the marked boards to the miter saw and adjust the blade to line up with your cut line. Roll the blade across the line to test the alignment. Once you set the angle, leave it there to make all the cuts on the table legs. Cut one leg, drop it into the jig to see if it fits, then use it as a template to mark 3 more. Cut them to length. Time to mark the half lap joint. Drop a leg into the jig and mark its edges on the tabletop. Flip it over and outline it in the other direction to create an X on the tabletop. Return one leg to the jig and mark where the board and the lines meet on both sides of the 2x6. Use a rafter square to connect the marks and set it aside. Mark another leg on the other side of the X. Set the depth of the miter saw to half the thickness of the leg boards. The rough-sawn lumber we used is actually 1 3/4 inches thick, so we set the depth to 7/8 of an inch. Use the saw's sliding function to make cuts between the layout lines. The tighter the cuts, the easier the next step will be. Knock the slivers free with a hammer, then clean out the joint with the chisel. Notch the second leg the same way and press the 2 together. Use the cut legs to mark a second pair and make a half lap joint. To build the legs, add construction adhesive to 1/2 of the joint, then press the other half in place. Use deck screws to cinch the 2 halves together. Be sure to leave the center of the joint clear. Back at the tabletop, remove the temporary cleat and center it between the other 2. Draw an outline of the cleat, remove it, and add construction adhesive. Drive deck screws in a zigzag pattern to fasten it. Clamps make it easy to attach the legs. First, apply construction adhesive to the cleat and tabletop. Position the legs and clamp them to the cleat, lined up with the bevels. Use long deck screws to go through the legs and into the cleat. Attach the other leg assembly the same way. To make the leg braces, prop a 2x4 between the center cleat and legs. Use the speed square to mark where the 2x4 crosses the cleat and the legs. At the miter saw, use the lines to set the blade angle. Cut both ends, then dry fit the brace. Trim off more if the brace lands above the intersection of the legs. Add construction adhesive to the cleat and the end of the brace that rests against the legs. Put the brace in position, screw through the brace and into the center cleat, then through the brace and into the legs. Repeat this process for the other brace, then have a friend help you flip the table over so you can admire your work. Time to build the benches. They come together like the table for the most part. Space the 2x6 you already cut. For the cleats, make them the full width of the benches. Cut them to the length on the miter saw and bevel the ends to 30 degrees. It's a closer match to the angle of the bench legs. Attach the first 2 bench cleats just like those on the tabletop, but this time 9 inches from the end. Now for the legs. A comfortable bench height is about 17 inches. Measure for that minus the thickness of the bench top and mark the position for the temporary cleat. Screw it down just as before to create another jig. Mark the angles on a 2x4, cut it to length on the miter saw, then check the fit. Use it as a template to mark and cut the other 7 legs. Here's a different way to mark a half lap joint. Clamp the legs into position, then mark where they overlap. You can also cut half lap joints with a circular saw. Arrange the legs with their marks lined up, then clamp them in place. Set the depth of the circular saw blade to half the thickness of the boards, then cut between the lines. Remove the slivers with hammer and chisel to make the joint smooth. Test the fit of the half lap joint. If it fits nicely, use this pair of legs as a template to mark and cut the others. Then spread adhesive in the joint and press the legs together. Clamp the legs in position against the outside of the cleat, then clamp the joint. Drive a pair of deck screws through the outside of each leg and into the cleat. Then add a screw into each corner of the leg's half lap joint. Now remove the temporary cleat, center it, and attach it with adhesive and deck screws. Finally, the braces. There's an alternative way to mark the brace. Rest it against the center cleat. Use a rafter square to mark the cut line at the center cleat, then trim it at the miter saw. Bring the brace back to the bench, butt the mitered end against the cleat, and mark where the other end passes the legs. Trim the board to length on the miter saw. Repeat this process for each brace and cut them to fit. They're all slightly different. Attach the braces with deck screws. Now flip the benches over and have a seat at your new picnic set.